Hello and welcome to Dyslexia Explored. I'm Darius Namdaran, your host, and today I've got a person who's a microbiologist, been in the pharmaceutical industry for 20 years, then was doing lab work for 10 years, discovered her dyslexia challenges, got mentoring, pivoted into project management, and is now a neurodiversity trainer and coach. I'd like to introduce you to Danielle Cudjoe Michalski. Have I said that right? Let me say it Could you say it properly for me? Forgive me.
No problem. My name is a tongue twister. So it's Danielle Cudjoe Michalski, which is so interesting for someone who is dyslexic. It
Yes,
always comes with a story. And I always say to everybody, that's my name. Just call me Danielle.
Danielle. Danielle, it's great to have you on the podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing your story. Every time we hear someone's story, their life story of dyslexia, it's just so informative. There's so many consistent patterns and also surprises and interesting outcomes and advantages, challenges, and so forth. So tell us a little bit about where you are right now. Give us an idea introduce yourself. I talked a bit about the microbiology, but we're going to cover that whole journey in more detail. But round out that introduction, where you are at the moment and where have you come from?
So as you said, I found out I was dyslexic in my final year of university. I had a very interesting past with the word dyslexia because actually my mum noticed that I had challenges at a very young age in primary school. And back in those days, I'm a millennial. So back in those days, it wasn't really supported. So basically, I was told that no, you're just average, it's fine. And then I went through my education system. So my final year of university, that's when I got diagnosed that I was dyslexic. And it literally was just before I left university. So I didn't have a chance to really get any support or understand it and just went into working world. So when you said 10 years as a bench scientist, as a microbiologist, that's exactly what happened. I was just trying to deal with the challenges, just trying to make it through to the world and the working world and this corporate environment. I didn't even consider the typical dyslexic challenges like the reading and writing and grammar, let alone all the cognitive differences that we now know that come under dyslexia as well. And then halfway through my career, I had an amazing mentor and coach who happened to just be a colleague of mine who had been quite senior in the organization and had taken a break and came back, who said to me, I think you're great as a microbiologist, but you could do more. And that's when she started getting me to think about strengths, my personal strengths, and then obviously my dyslexia strengths came out of that. On top of that, I'd always coached and mentored and trained people as a part of my job, even as a microbiologist. I loved training people and helping others, and doing loads of different projects. We'll probably get into that as we talk. Then I was able to pivot into a project management role, first as a support role, do more training and supporting senior project managers, and then becoming a project manager myself. And during that period, I was very privileged to work with a lovely group of neurodiverse individuals and create the Neurodiverse Network within that company. We co-founded it and built it up into a community. But there was something around the coaching piece was always calling me. And I decided to level up on my coaching, get certified. And on that journey, my coaching journey, I started to do more talks on behalf of my organization around neurodiversity and decided that that's where I wanted to specialize in supporting neurodiverse professionals, diagnosed or not, really understand how they can support themselves and really help them on that journey. And not just from a workplace perspective, but a holistic approach, because we know that our neurodiverse traits don't just impact us at work, it impacts us at all areas of our life. And so at the beginning of this year, I decided to leave my job, leave my corporate career, and become this coach full-time, helping other organizations who maybe not have the privilege to have people in their organizations or have sometimes the budget or the time to really embed a neuro-inclusive work and culture into their workplace, and also start helping individuals on a one-to-one basis, which is what I love.
Fantastic. Thanks. Great overview. So, Danielle, take us back to life before you discovered you had dyslexia.
Such a good question. Before I had dyslexia, so I grew up
Well,
And
before you knew you had
well,
dyslexia.
yeah, before I knew I had dyslexia. So I grew up being I remember my mum saying when I was a baby, I was very talkative. I would babble, babble, babble all the time. And so a lot of people assume at this stage of my life, and even when I was just diagnosed around I'd say my 20s, that I was quite extroverted. But actually, I'm quite introverted. So I was very shy. I was very quiet. My mum is is extroverted, so would push me and get me to interact with people. But there were a lot of things that were showing up for me that were really challenging. Obviously, then going into the education system and then having to get involved in the reading and writing aspect, that's when it really, really impacted me. Like I had a lot of trouble around that, a lot of lack of confidence. I always had this feeling in my childhood and probably in my pre-teens, well, actually even going into my teens, that I was intelligent. I had it was this weird kind of paradox of I'm intelligent. Like, I don't think I'm stupid. I actually think I have sense more than that, but a little bit egotistic, but I think I have more sense than the average. Like, I understand quite complex scenarios. I get it, but I can't communicate it in a certain way. And it was really, really frustrating me. And so it had a massive impact on my confidence and reflecting back my mental health. I always had this doubt that I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't fit in. If you build up what we know about dyslexia now, it's not just the typical reading, writing, and grammar, but some of the cognitive function, some of the interactions that you can have with socialization. There were things showing up with me in terms of feeling overstimulated, feeling socially exhausted. But I would push against that because I would be like, but it's me, it's Danielle, you can do it. And so I think even early on, I probably had, before burnout even existed, had little starts of mini burnout in my early age. Definitely when I went to university, I really struggled. I just about made it into uni, which was very interesting. It just happened to be the year and the combination of courses I did able to get the points to go. And that
When
had
you
a
say
massive...
you just about, you mean you just got in by the skin of your
I
teeth?
just got in. So basically what happened is my teachers at school kept on saying, and this is before I got diagnosed, kept on saying, oh, she's brilliant. Because I was basically, I think in class, I was able to articulate myself and really show and demonstrate I understood. And in exams and coursework, it just wasn't measuring up. But no one took the time to say, why is there a massive gap? So the assumption was she could do A-level maths. I was rubbish. I completely rubbish at A-level maths. But my teacher was like, no, she can do it. And so naively, my mum and me just assumed that, yeah, okay, go for it. I always loved science. However, I loved other areas like psychology and law. I didn't even think about going for anything like that because it involved writing and reading. And I was like, can't do that. Just gonna go for science. It's easy. And even with that, I really struggled a lot of times in my exams. So one particular exam, I didn't actually pass it. And back then, when you didn't pass the first exam, you just didn't get the whole A-level. So the whole A-level I literally lost, which means for a point scheme which goes into university, I'd lost a significant amount of points to get in. But luckily I was able to have a combination of the chemistry and maths to make an extra qualification.
Wow.
And that point managed to get me in conditionally that I would actually pass my first year. And I smashed my first year because I was in a space where we were kind of like bridging between mainstream school and then university. If anybody knows, in the UK, we kind of like the first year is usually a foundation piece in a lot of the science degrees, and then they start building up the very specific area of science depending on the degree that you do. And so it was like just a repeat kind of like a bridging year, and I was able to absolutely smash that and able to stay. But it was interesting because when I was at secondary school, which is like a high school, no one cared. And one thing I liked about science is no one cared about my grammar or English. They're like, oh, yeah, she understands it. No, there was hardly any red pen. As soon as I hit university, red pen central, the red pen of doom hit. And I was like, this is like before we had like our own laptops. You're lucky if you had a computer. We were still writing and giving written assignments. I just want to put it to the audience what the times were when I mean red pen, I literally mean red pen.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember looking at my work, and I thought naively before I went to university that I'd overcome my dyslexia, or not dyslexia, my issues with writing and reading and writing. Because remember, I wasn't diagnosed at that point. And then when I went to university, I was surprised to see it was still there. And that then motivated me after going through university. Can be quite challenging. At the end of the year, trying to do dissertation, which we all know is a big written document, the way it's structured now, that then had a massive impact on my mental health. I started getting really, really overwhelmed and a lot of anxiety around even starting to do it. And that pushed me to then seek further help and a diagnosis.
So what was your wake-up call? Because a lot of people have, little intuitions that this might be something like dyslexia, or this might be an actual issue, until something, it's often, I find, if in this podcast, we just ask one question.
Yeah.
Who was it that woke you up to it?
I could tell you who. And it's so funny because I can't remember her name. So she doesn't get any notification when I do these. But basically, and this is how bad it was, how to the line, very typical neurodiverse, but to the line, I saw this. I was in the lab doing my experiments. I knew I had to do a dissertation. We had two choices, a research paper or a practical. You could tell which one I went for.
I'm going to go for practical.
Yeah, exactly. Less writing. Then I realized I had to write. And then I was panicking. I was like, oh my God, I've never written this amount of words in my life. Okay. And so I was in the lab preparing to do my dissertation practical, which was over the summer holidays. You had the labs open for PhD students, master students. And I heard two other students, I think one was a PhD student, they were just talking in the corridor just outside the lab. And she just said the word dyslexia. That's all I remember hearing, the word dyslexia. Bearing in mind that the only ever time I'd heard that word, and I mean that really from a community perspective where I was brought up, from a family perspective, even from an interaction with others, the only ever time I'd heard the word dyslexia is when my mum was going to my school, went to my school in primary school and said, I think my daughter's got issues around reading and writing. And I remember that word dyslexia back then. So we're talking a good, 15 years later, I hear this word dyslexia. I understand that it somehow has in the past been associated with me. And I don't think I've moved so quickly from the lab to the hallway. And I've never, ever been so empowered to talk to a complete stranger and say, oh my God, how did you find out you're dyslexic? What does that mean? And we had a conversation, it lasted about 5 minutes. She explained that she had struggled with reading and writing it, and she got support at the university. I was devastated and surprised at the same time because I was like, you're telling me I could have got help? But still thinking this may not be me. And then she told me to contact the disability department at the university. I went to Kingston University, an amazing space. The lady said, bring some of my work in. So I sent her some of my written work. And within probably 5 minutes of reading it, she's like, I recommend you go for an assessment as soon as possible. And when she said that to me, a part of me kind of felt like, I think I have this. I think I'm dyslexic. And then she had a caveat that, some people don't like to go for the assessment because they're scared. They might find out they're not dyslexic or they're not neurodiverse. And I was like, I don't care. I need to know if I am, because I know that there's support that can be given. And so I paid the money because it was a small amount compared to now, but you could go to a private psychologist that was advised by the university. So I paid the money, I went through the hours of tests, hours and hours of tests, which I'm sure your other podcasters have talked about. And usually, as we know, you then wait for a report. And I explained to him, I'm in my final year of university. By the time that had all happened, I'd actually was probably a month away from giving in my dissertation. So I didn't really have much time to understand the concept of it. And because I'd stated that, he literally tapped me on the shoulder on the way out and said, we can't wait 2 weeks. You need to know now that you are severely dyslexic. I don't understand how this wasn't picked up before. He said that you do have quite a higher IQ that could have helped you mask some of it, but it still should have been picked up in your education. And then that was a whirlwind. Before I could blink, my dissertation was submitted and I was doing my exams and graduating. So I had no time to process what that was. I had no time to really get support. I think I got my eyes assessed for the color screening. I got a laptop for about a month for a couple of coursework and one tuition session, because by the time it all set up, all the money came in from my local authority, which is our area that funds support. So you get funding. At that time, you got funding from your local, where you were born, where you lived, authority to pay for supporting you at your university. By the time that all came in, I was graduating.
Wow.
So,
wow. Okay, let's just pause and reflect on that. Because first of all, one person saying dyslexia in the hallway created a transformation in the trajectory of your life.
yeah, completely.
And I think, wow, that's so powerful. And it's one of the reasons why I ask that question every single episode. Who was the person who woke you up to this? And it's often just one person that says, hey, by the way, I think you might have dyslexia. And the person goes, oh my. And then they go off and something happens. So I highly recommend any one of you who are listening is say this to people. You might have dyslexia. And often I hear people say, they go to their friends and they go, I think I might have dyslexia. And their friends go, yeah, obviously,
Well, it's had a downstream impact, because remember, this person was a stranger, right? And so I didn't know them. They didn't know me. So the seed was sown 15 years before by my mum saying two things.
Yes.
Your school told you you're never going to go to university. In primary school, they said I'd never go to university. I wasn't smart enough. And that you don't have anything like dyslexia. And so because she had the courage to put that seed in, what she didn't know is 15 years later, that would empower me or give me the courage to speak out and ask someone a question. And
Yes.
that person didn't know me. That person couldn't say yes or no.
Yeah.
But it was my curiosity that when I know that something's not right, that helped me. And then it continued. When I found out, being the person I am, I love my friends. I'm an only child, so my friends are very, very close to me. One of my friends was a teacher. She said she had just finished her teaching degree and was in primary school, and we were talking about it. And I said to her, I'm dyslexic. She goes, no, you're not. And then we had a lovely discussion around dyslexia, and her then knowing that when she goes into the classroom and she built up her now 25-year career, she has now been like, I know what dyslexia is. I can make sure I support the children in my class. But then I was talking to a really good friend of mine. I'm going to shout out Jennifer. She's an amazing woman. And we used to see, this is how you can tell that, number one, neurodiverse and dyslexic people hover together. We were really, really close. I wasn't popular. She wasn't popular. We had that unpopular little group, and we both loved science. And we used to proofread each other's work. So we were joking. I said to her, oh, guess what? I got diagnosed as being dyslexic. She's like, really? It's like, yeah. It used to be funny that we used to proofread each other's work, and we both would submit it, and we still get red pen in school. Yeah. Funny. About 6 months later, she called me up and says, just let you know, I've just got diagnosed dyslexia. So that was triggered for me saying I was dyslexic. And then she's like, oh, maybe I should get assessed. And we actually joked, oh, it'd be so funny if like the two dyslexics in the class were proofreading each other's work, thinking everything was okay. And then, we found out, and neither of us, though. So she found out post her university as well. I found out also that two of my really close friends, one's an amazing biologist and one's a massive business owner, they were both dyslexic, had no idea. They'd found out through their school education, but hadn't really talked about it. And because I like to talk, I was telling everybody, guess what? I'm dyslexic. In my university days, being very naive around the stigma around what that might mean, and realizing that I had gravitated naturally to a whole array of different people who were neurodiverse in some capacity. And that was really great, even though we all had our different journeys, and we don't necessarily talk about dyslexia openly, but it was able to know that there were other people who I connected with, who I respected, who were doing amazing things, who were also dyslexic. And that I was very, very privileged, unlike some others, to have a group of people around me like that.
Do you think you've got ADHD as well? Not that but there's quite a lot of co-occurrence between ADHD and
Yeah,
dyslexia.
so this is a journey that I wanted to progress. Unfortunately, because I've had a lot of physical challenges this year, I kind of put it on the back burner, but I do have traits of ADHD, definitely. It's interesting when you're a coach, and I was saying this to all of my clients, when you're a coach, I don't think clients realize how much coaches get out of a coaching session from a client. And working with neurodiverse individuals, and it's not about directing them, it's about them telling their story and them taking that path themselves. But you gain a lot of deeper insight than you get on any blog or website. And there were things showing up, and I was like, this is me. Oh my gosh. And so there are aspects of it that I see in myself. So I am trying to go down the route of actually formally knowing, mainly because I want to know. And one thing I do like about diagnosis is that you get to understand the specific challenges that you have, not just the general challenges that come under. So I am looking into that. But yeah, there's aspects where I'm like, that's me. This is a very weird
Yes.
situation.
Isn't
And
it? Because I've got another podcast called the Personal Brain Trainer Executive Function podcast that I do with Dr. Erica Warren, and it's about executive functions, which is often the realm of ADHD. But the reality of executive functions is that dyslexia affects your executive functions.
yeah.
And what I've noticed is that if you're first identified with ADHD, okay, you tend to associate all of your challenges with the ADHD,
Mhm.
and vice versa. If you're identified with dyslexia, you tend to associate all of your challenges with the dyslexia, but
Mhm.
actually they can co-occur. So
Yeah.
I've had clients where they're ADHD, okay, and they're like, I've got all the medication, I've done everything I'm meant to do, but I'm finding it so hard to do this university work and so on. And I was speaking to a consultant whose daughter was going through this, a medical consultant, very intelligent, very well versed, gone through the whole ADHD process for her daughter. Daughter's going to university, and she's saying, like, we're pulling her hair out because she's, highly motivated, taking all her medication, doing everything she's meant to be doing, but still she seems to be dropping the ball and she doesn't know why. And I said, let's just go through this dyslexia screener. And we went through this dyslexia screener, and she's like, yes to all of that. And I'm
Mhm.
like, she could have dyslexia as well. And she's like, what? You could have ADHD and dyslexia at the same time? And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And it could be that your challenge is with processing, not with
Mhm.
focus, because a lot of time it's like, right, stay more focused, inhibitory control, and so on. And actually, it could be just the way that you're processing information. It could be Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. You might need a tint to stop the letters jumping up and down, and then
Yeah.
everything's
Yeah.
sorted. Or it could be you need to learn how to read with your finger to stop your eye,
Mhm.
jumping back a line, just some simple techniques or underlining techniques and things like that that can help with dyslexia in a practical way.
Yeah.
And when she did that, the daughter was like, oh my goodness, I feel equipped now. I can do this.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like I said, I always think about my journey with my neurodiverse, and I'm not gonna say dyslexia only, an interesting one, because I had spouts of mental health, kind of like episodes, but periods of my life, and some that were really quite drastic. And I do associate a lot of it around some of the lack of support and some of the past traumas about maybe not having that support around my dyslexia or my neurodiverse traits. I saw a therapist who was nothing to do with neurodiversity. I never went through her for neurodiversity. I went through her through my work just to get support in a period I was really stressed. And she happened to have a speciality in dyslexia. Didn't know. And I was talking to her, I said to her, I'm dyslexic. And we started talking about sound and the impact that sound had on me. And we were talking about it as a positive trigger to help me motivate me and how it impacts me emotionally. And she turned around and said, you do know there's a lot of neurodiverse and dyslexic individuals who are audibly impacted. And so I was like, huh, interesting. And then I think a couple of years later, I had an assessment. So I was thinking, I've got something wrong with my hearing. So there's me going to Specsavers, which is an eye place for those people internationally that does hearing testing, you know, the youngest person probably in the room. And with my mum, who just happened to go there as well with me to kind of just to come. They said, oh, bring someone with you just in case you've got to put something in your ears or we've got to test anything. So she came with me and the guy did assessment. And I was like, I just think I've just got maybe some damage, or is it inflamed? I just want to check with you guys before I go to my GP and stuff, because I know that you can check and the GP is not always that helpful. And they did the assessment and they were like, yeah, your other ear is really quite a low in age range compared to your other one. And they did like loud sounds. And I was like, I don't like loud sounds. And then he turned to my mum and goes, how's your daughter with loud sounds? She's like, oh, well, she never liked loud sounds. We always put ear muffs on her when she was younger, take her to the fireworks. If a balloon popped or anything comes to her behind, she would freak out. And this is also the person who likes horror movies. So it's really weird that I don't like loud sounds, but that kind of like anticipation you get in a psychological horror, I love it. And it was just weird. It was like, yeah, there's something this. And then she said to the person, she never said to me, when she talks, she leans in with one side. And I was like, huh? And so when I started looking into the audible sound and the impact, it was so interesting when you talk about comorbidities, because you've got individuals who have ADHD and autism who are really majorly impacted by sound. And it just made me think, that's something else that showed up for me that isn't typically found in dyslexia, but could be linked to some of the things that have shown up through my whole life that
Yes.
I just ignored, or I just thought Danielle's always sensitive. That's what I was. Danielle's a sensitive one. And then I realized I did deeper into sounds. I think we found that my hearing was okay, but there definitely was a cognitive sensitivity to the levels of sounds.
I've got you. Okay, so it's that typical thing. It's a very similar scenario to the first time dyslexia was identified in the world was in London on Harley Street, when someone was taken to an optician. And they said there must be something wrong with his eyes because he can't read, you know? And the optician says there's absolutely nothing wrong with his eyes, but I've seen this with other patients. And that's the guy who created the term word blindness. Seems to be some sort of internal blindness to these words, but it's not in the eyes. And so in effect, a similar thing, you're going to someone who's physically looking at your ears, but nothing particularly wrong with your physical ears, but your ability to process sound is different.
And then I started looking at things like light and how that impacted me. And that, interestingly, was a few years ago when I was in a situation. I always felt, oh, this is too much noise, there's too much light, I'm just overwhelmed with the situation. It's my social skills. And because I was at the amazing dyslexia show, and it was an environment that just happened to be very busy, it's very challenging when you're doing a conference to be able to support neurodiverse individuals. And I know they're working really hard on that. But it was I realized I wasn't overwhelmed because I'd actually met a whole load of people that I'd met online in person. I was in a really safe, comfortable space. I was exhausted from a stimulation perspective. And I realized that light was having an impact on me as well as the sound. And so when you talk about comorbidities and how things can kind of overlap and how things can show up, this makes us think about beyond dyslexia. So when I introduce myself, I say I'm formally diagnosed dyslexia with traits of ADHD and dyspraxia. So people understand that in my world, it's not as simple as saying dyslexia. In my world, in my everyday, other things show up. And I think that's probably the one message I'd want people to hear on here is that, yes, you might be looking at dyslexia, but don't ignore the other things that show up for you.
Absolutely, I agree. And that's been a journey for me over the last, I suppose, 5 years since I've been doing this podcast? It started as a dyslexia show, and it's increasingly becoming the dyslexia and ADHD show, neurodiversity as truly in its this different traits. I think of it sometimes like these graphic equalizer sliders. You remember the old boom boxes we used to
Oh
have?
yeah, 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 yeah.
And you'd have lots of physical graphic equalizers and the joy and sliding up the bass and the treble and so
Exactly.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's sometimes like most people are somewhere around the average on all these different channels, but with dyslexia, ADHD, and neurodiversity, different ones have been put up high and others down low. So you're listening to the same music, but hearing it differently.
Definitely, definitely.
And I think sometimes you're listening, hearing the same ideas, seeing the same problems, and different aspects of it are accentuated towards you and seem very obvious, and you can find a solution, whereas it can be just masked by general noise for other people. And so we're kind of attuned differently, tuned up slightly differently, specialized minds.
Mm.
And each person, I suppose you could think of different channels. I'm just imagining this right now. Riff with me for a moment. Like, imagine you've got this graphic equalizer with, like, I don't know, 10 different channels or 12 different channels, and six on one side and six on the other. And on one side is the sort of very linear, systematic thinking, and the other side is more the creative, dynamic. You could maybe even categorize one side being more of the autistic realm, maybe, and another side more dyslexia, ADHD realm with different channels. And on the ADHD, dyslexia realm, you've got the processing channel, maybe processing sound, processing words. Then you've got executive function channels like working memory, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, which tend to be more associated with ADHD, but affect dyslexia too. And then on the other channels, you've maybe got, I don't know, like, attention to detail, whether you're highly detailed orientated or not,
Routine and
attention,
structure. Because
yeah,
they love
routine and
routine and
structure,
structure, those kind of
yeah,
things on that side. Yeah. Um,
yeah,
I
automaticity,
yeah, I think that's an amazing way of thinking about it, because if you take it from that perspective, then people understand that on either side, and remember, there is a lot of people who've got ADHD and autism, so they've got a combination. Is you can nudge that little bit up, nudge that one little bit down, nudge that, and so really and truthfully, though you might diagnose that final sound, if you think about the sound that comes out of that
yes,
equalizer, though you might classify that sound as that sound is dyslexia or that sound is ADHD, the nuances of that little tab up or down or that button twisted ever so slightly makes the diversity that we have within our spectrum of being neurodiverse.
yeah,
And
yeah,
this is the most important thing people need to understand. It isn't just a standard, you have issues with your, I don't know, with your working memory, and that is it, full stop. It's the different levels that create the spectrum of individuals and how they process. And it's interesting, I've got some clients who just have a slow processing speed. They're not
that's
classified
it.
as being, dyslexic or anything. It just happens to impact their reading and writing, but they're actually not diagnosed as being dyslexic. It's just a slower processing speed, like the example that you gave.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's our responsibility to understand ourselves
Mm.
and to equip ourselves as adults in the adult realm. I think in the adult space, let's just talk about the adult
Yeah,
space right now.
definitely. Yeah.
As an adult, when you discover you're neurodiverse, and then someone starts saying to you, Darius, you've got dyslexia, but you might have ADHD as well. And then I say to other people, I think I might have ADHD. And my wife and my family are all like, duh, of course you do,
Mm.
You're like, oh no, do I have to go through this whole process with a
Yeah.
whole another range of, because there's a part of you where it's kind of like, can I not just get on with stuff? Can I not just,
Life.
let's just get on and do stuff, and you do that from, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and you realize it's kind of like deciding to go for a walk up a mountain with shoes that are too small,
Mm.
You can get away with it when you're doing short journeys, but after 10 years of wondering why you always get to the top of the hill with complete blisters when your friends aren't completely blistered and they're like, oh, you can't be doing this right or whatever. There must be something wrong with you. And you realize, do you know what? Maybe I need shoes that fit my feet better.
Yeah.
Maybe we need tools, techniques, and processes that fit our minds better.
No, I completely agree. And this is where I'd made that switch from supporting a community in a workplace and doing my job as a project manager and becoming a coach.
This podcast is sponsored by dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com, which helps you organize yourself creatively with a productivity system for Apple devices. Let's go through that story. Tell us about that story. Let's get to your story again. So we've got to uni, okay?
Yeah.
You've got your degree, okay? You go out of that degree and you get a job.
Yeah.
And are you in that job for 30 years within the, or did you say 20 years and 10
just
of them
about 20 years? So
yeah,
basically that whole, so
because
I was
you're not that old, you know.
So I did a couple of jobs before,
yeah,
as you do, and some of them are very interesting. They might make me think, that's another ADHD thing, you know, doing an extra course. At one point, I was doing 2 jobs, so a full-time corporate job, a second what would seem like a full-time job, and doing a photography course and learning to drive. I mean, when you say, could you possibly have ADHD? I wonder now.
I think you might. I think you might.
But again, it was high energy, young energy.
Yeah.
But also not great for mental health, not sustainable, which is my thing now.
Yes.
So I left university. I was very lucky to go and work in the food industry for a little bit. I worked in a school for a little bit, would never do that again. And they wanted me to become a science teacher. And I said, no, I was just I'm a very emotional person. I'm very connected on positive and maybe emotion. We don't have positive and negative emotions, just emotion. So I feel people, I'm very empathetic. That just wouldn't work for me.
Yeah, you couldn't take the aggro from
I would absorb it too
kids.
much.
Yeah.
And then I moved, had the opportunity to work for GSK, which is GlaxoSmithKline back in the day. And that's where my career stayed. I worked on one site and then I moved to a local site where I'm not too far from where I live. And that's where I spent the majority of my career. So I spent around, say, 18, 19 years, I'd probably by 20th if I was still there this year in that career. Of that, 10 years was in a lab as a microbiologist. And I went into microbiology. Again, I enjoyed that. Did a part of my course at the end, my dissertation was around microbiology. However, it was very challenging because obviously I'm dealing with bacteria, viruses who have Latin names. And when I started, it was very interesting that though we're talking about 2000s, we're going into the 2000s, I was still working with paper. We weren't digitally there yet. So I had to hand write. So when I was in my food role, the first job I got in the micro lab, I had these massive boards and we'd have to hand write everything. And there was one computer and we weren't allowed to use it. And then pivot into when I worked at GSK, again, it was handwritten. And back then that was the time when people were starting to embrace people having their own laptops and getting things on digital and getting things online. But there were aspects, and I just happened to be in that department where things were handwritten. And that brought a lot of challenges. Well, first of all, writing, when I had to write, there were certain bacteria that you're not allowed to have that we specifically screen for in our pharmaceutical drugs. This is like a part of what we have as our criteria of microbiology. I had to literally get a blank piece of paper and literally write them like you do lines in school, just so I can get the spelling right. Because if you write something wrong, we have very, very strict standards around how you correct. You can't typex it out. You can't scribble it out. You have to cross it. You have to date it, and you have to initial it. It's called good manufacturing practices. It's across the whole industry back then. Now we have digital stuff. We can have audit trails that tell you where the correction was done. But back then on paper, you don't have that. So if you think about me in a little box trying to write E. coli and spelling it wrong several times, and the amount of times I had to cross it out and put my signature and put the date and write it again and spell it again wrong, and that caused so much stress. So I'd sit there and I would just write out these words over and over again so I could get it into my long-term memory, the spelling, just so that when I had to do the document by hand, I knew automatically, in a way, by memorizing the pattern of the word than actually spelling the word, I could spell it right and say it right. And that's, one tactic, one strategy that I had to do. So you can imagine something that was so simple for other people ends up taking so much of my energy, so much of my mental energy to be able to find a strategy to work through it. But on the other hand, what I now know was I was recruited as being the jack of all trades. So I had very much a positive experience of working across with multiple different people, from engineers to directors of, directors in the organization, to cleaners, I had to talk to all these people as a part of my role for different reasons. And that then made me realize that the empathy and the difference in projects kept me interested to be there for 10 years. As I kind of become more senior in terms of a microbiologist and started to move into another part of that department, that's when that sponsor, that coach, that mentor said to me, you could do this job, but I think you could do so much more. And really opened my eyes again, like you said, with that person who was the person that made me think, that person that changed my trajectory in terms of being dyslexia. This person also had an equal big impact with saying the word strengths, instead of where a lot of the focus I had with the 10 years beforehand was focused on my challenges. She said, but you've got strengths, right? I knew, but I didn't really know. And allowing me to make space and support to go on that journey of understanding what those strengths are is really important. And I think, like you said, going back to what you said initially around, you get the diagnosis, what do you do with that? People really underestimate that. A lot of people as adults don't do anything. And it's not because they don't want to develop themselves or understand lives. And they sometimes don't have the space to actually sit down and really reflect on, what does that diagnosis, or what does that now mean to me? And what do I actually need? And having someone to sit there and make space with you, and also turn the focus onto you, because a lot of neurodiverse individuals focus on others. How do I stop others for thinking that I'm this way? How do I support others? When you start thinking about having space, someone holds space for you to think about you, what you may need, for your support for your challenges, but also let's look at some of the things that you find really easy to do that you don't have that stress with. Flipping that script, that's the bit that I think sometimes is missing in some of the support that's provided for neurodiverse individuals, and particularly adults. I don't support so much the children. I think there's some mechanisms in the education system that supports children. They've got parents, they've got other legal things around that, and they've got support through those avenues as well. I think with adults, we just assume that, okay, you've got diagnosed an adult, get on with it. Not knowing that the issue hasn't gone away just because you've got a diagnosis. It's just the beginning of your journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So should we do a shout out for this lady who talked about the strengths?
Yeah, so her name is Catherine Wallace. She will be absolutely, like, probably very kind of like, oh my God, you mentioned me, but she changed my life.
Yeah.
She shows me that, again, this is the power for anybody that works in a really like kind of corporate or that kind of like hierarchical workplace, which can be challenging for us to work in. This is when having not just as coach and a mentor, but a sponsor, someone who's looking at you, you'd be surprised how many people are watching you in a positive light, who can see you. And she saw me. She had watched me as a jack of all trades for years. Funny enough, when we met, we never actually really got on very well and became so close. She watched me, she observed, and she had that senior experience to be able to understand people. And so when I was going to move into her department, she'd already assessed I could do it. She already had said, yeah, you can do this. But actually, is that really where you want to be? And having leaders who actually say you're good, but taking their ego out of having you and really be people-centric and really say, okay, but what do you need, is so important generally. But for neurodiverse individuals, it is absolutely life-changing, because a lot of the time we do not think about, like I said, we don't think about our needs. And for someone to say, what do you want? That might be sometimes the first time we've actually been asked what we want, but any part of our journey. Yeah.
So you then started to work on your strengths. Now, we rewound back into your story because we were thinking about how the stress that was triggered by dyslexia or some of your challenges could often lead you into a darker mental space.
Mhm.
And I think it would be good to just explore that for a moment because often what I've observed is what stress tends to do is put pressure on your weak spots, whether it could be physical weak spots, for me it's eczema, someone else it could be their gut, it could be their digestive system, it could be inflammation on their knees, it could be, a hearing infection problem. It's all sorts of different little areas where we have a particular weakness, physical, emotional, and even a mental one, that if you put too much pressure on it, that's the area that kind of breaks first or gives first, like a dodgy knee or something like that. And what you're basically describing is that you maybe had a propensity towards some depression, and then when stress came along, that's where it showed up. Could you talk a bit more about that? Am I
I
right in
think,
characterizing it like that, do you think?
yeah, I think it was more around, and I think this was just before I'd had that conversation with Catherine around I see you. I was getting to that point where you're doing everything. Like you said, you're wearing the shoes. I'm climbing that mountain on a daily basis, and everybody else is not getting blisters and I am. It's that whole thing of why. And it got to a point where the blisters got so bad that I couldn't walk anymore. I literally, it was Christmas. I'd had Christmas break. I suppose one positive aspect is I'm very self-aware of my body and my mind. I went to my GP and said, I'm not coping. It was beyond talking to a therapist through the service at work. It was beyond that. It was like, I am not coping. They said, all right, okay, we can give you some medication. I said, I'm not sure if I need that right now. And then it was like, okay, it's Christmas break. Chris, you're off now from work. Let's see if that helps. And by the time I went away, I had a holiday, I went away with some family and came back. I literally came off the plane, went to bed that day, and then never got out of bed. And I was lucky that at that time I was living with my mother, and I just couldn't move. I couldn't do anything.
So
My brain
do you
had
mind,
literally stopped.
wow, do you mind me asking what your blisters were?
Well, it pivoted to that was a very difficult situation. It pivoted to me actually going to a place in North London to like, voluntarily go in to get support because it was clearly that I wasn't coping. And from that, it came up with things like perfectionism. So the internal dialogue of why, if you talk about the blister analogy, why can't I walk with blisters? Surely not everybody's got the right shoes. Surely other people have got blisters and they're coping. Why can't I just get on with it? It was that self-talk. It was, it came up, social anxiety came up. I realized I had social anxiety. And that was a big thing for me, big eye opener. I didn't really think I'd always been quite social, right? No, I'm an introvert and I'm brought up by an extrovert, very disciplined, very sociable person who was pushing me out of my comfort zone. Great in some circumstances, but actually, if you're going to be authentic to yourself, you need the downtime. And I didn't get that because, Danielle's just sociable. That's what she does. And not realizing that balance of energy, that recharge that's needed. And the boundaries, I was very strict with boundaries. I was very much around, we did a painting exercise and they were like, paint a picture and there was a border and I was very adamant, wasn't going over the border. And there's people going over and just painting all over the place. What do you mean you're painting outside the border? I'll paint the border. And little things like that again, this helps me now understand the journey and reflection. But it's like, oh, that was a big thing. And then I remember one other session where everybody got, and this one was a big one, everybody got a task. So a lot of people, we just arrived, we were the new group, we were going to be having one of our sessions as psychologists together. And she's like, right, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do this. She comes around to me and she just walks off. And I'm like, so what am I doing? Nothing. What do you mean I'm not doing anything? No, no, no. Everybody else has got a task or homework. Where's mine? You don't know, you don't have any. And the feeling around, there was a feeling around why do I not have something? What's going on there? And so though from a clinical perspective, I was able to get support in understanding that I was going through this period of time. There was other stresses coming up in regards to work and like the blisters and, you know, all the things that were showing up for me. It really helped me, maybe not at the time, but after, understand I really don't like being in a lot of social environments all the time. I really don't like being out of the line. Like I do like a form of structure, a form of order. I don't like, you know, if someone's given something challenging, I want to be challenged. And there were certain aspects of my personality that were core part of me that I was able to reflect on in being that period of time. And I would never regret going in there. I would never, ever regret that period of my time. If anybody said, could you get rid of that? I would say no. That was a life-changing change in terms of me pivoting into adulthood, particularly as well.
I'm sorry I interrupted you earlier when you were saying that you went to bed and you didn't get up, and then you were talking more, and then I interrupted you a little bit there. Sorry. Could you fill that in? What were you going to say? You know, you didn't get up, but then you went on and did this experience. What was the gap between not getting up and then going to that? How long did you spend in that sort of not getting up phase?
I spent about 3 weeks
Oh,
in
wow.
that not getting up space. And when I mean not getting up, I mean I wouldn't eat.
Yeah.
I would obviously have to go to the loo at some point, but because I'm not drinking or eating, that was very rare. Like literally, this is not talking about a Netflix situation or a YouTube situation. We're talking about in bed, hours and hours on end, literally consciously awake, anything, not moving, nothing. And I say 3 weeks in regards to the first week, you could say, she's not well. My mum's saying, you know, maybe you're not feeling very well, whatever. But then the rest of that time, my mum and my family were trying to get me support, whether that was through NHS. Eventually I was able to go private through work in terms of mental health support, but it was organizing all those things. And gradually, when it came to the point, they're like, Danielle, look, we can get you to get support, but we need you to talk to somebody. Okay, I'd have a conversation, but again, go back to not doing anything. And it got to that point, they always say about safeguarding, you know, are you harm to others themselves? And that's when I had to say, I don't know if I'm a harm to myself. And when you're at that point of don't know, obviously from a safeguarding perspective, you need to go and you need to be urgently watched, you need to be in a safe space where you can be monitored. And my mum worked full time at that time. And she's like, I cannot be off to watch her 24/7. I just can't. So that was the agreement, was for my safety to myself that I would volunteer to go in. Initially, it was meant to be for a month. I was in there for 3 months. And actually,
So,
it got to a point where it was quite institutionalized, where I actually didn't want to go because I just
yeah,
didn't want to face the world with all these new things
yeah,
I knew about myself and these new blisters that I'd known.
yeah.
It was hard.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
One last thing, I share it because I think a lot of even though when you look at adults, they get diagnosed, and you think, great, I've got strategies going forward. Don't forget some of the trauma that they may have gone through before they even got to that point. And that's
Yes,
what led me up to this point. And you mentioned
yes,
around how it manifested. I do believe some of it manifested into some of the physical challenges that I now have. All that trauma, all that stress has figured into me having, and I'm very open about having chronic autoimmune disease and things like that because I didn't actually face them. So I didn't think those things are interlinked. I know that we're still working on research to find out more around that. But I truly, for me, do think they interlink, and it is around obviously some of the things that show up in my lived experience, but I can't deny that some of that is around the lack of support, and I mean internal support, not necessarily computers and stuff. I mean space to talk about where I was feeling, being validated, being sensitive to audible sounds and light, being validated around social interactions, having that safe space, those things, getting that support. I think the lack of not having that has had an impact in some of the things that show up for me now. And everybody's different. But for me, that's what I believe.
So if we distill this down into like a formula, you know, a very basic formula, would you say that because of your dyslexia or neurodivergent traits, and it created circumstances which cause stress and sometimes a little some trauma, and that's then compounded and been internalized into your body and mind in certain ways, and
Yeah.
then through your work, this continuing without you realizing it came into this sort of 3 months situation, not wanting to wake up sort of scenario. So you personally make that causal link
Mm.
between the dyslexia and the mental effects?
Yeah, because when I reflected back, there are periods of time when I was younger when I had those mental health kind of challenges, but I didn't realize. And that was back then, no one talked about children's mental health. It wasn't a big thing unless you would drastically, if you'd committed suicide or anything like that, then
Yeah,
yeah, just a disclaimer for people. I hope that they get support if this has triggered them in any sort of way. But we didn't talk about mental health in children. We didn't talk about mental health at all, really. It was probably talk more around women, less around men, and definitely not around children in the most biased ways. And I think if I reflected back, I had blips, but this was one where the expectation of being able to be, again, the adult thing, I'm an adult, I should be able to cope with, I should.
should.
I'm not,
Yeah,
this should piece.
yeah,
I should
yeah.
be able to deal with this. I'm an
Yes,
adult by
yes,
numbers, and not realizing that as an adult, you still need support. And in a community like mine, especially in the Black community, where the women are seen to be quite strong and very positive, and I'm surrounded by very strong women, again, that builds on not only am I an adult, I'm a Black strong woman, I should be able to cope with this. Not
yeah,
only that, I'm a professional, I should be able to cope with this. I work for GSK, I should be able to do with this. I'm
yeah,
able to do this. And all these kind of things that you build up yourself, I should be able to cope. And that's not the reality. And so when you
yes,
talk about distilling it down, that then ends up being into a massive part of my mental health crash, that not getting up. And then even though I was dealing with it coming out the other end, still not really dealing with it properly. So this then having someone say you've got strengths, and then that's great, working on that, but still not really processing it. That's when it could start to manifest. And for me, that's when I started having some of the autoimmune issues that I had. So it started to manifest for me in a very physical way.
What kind
Um,
of, if you don't mind me asking, is it ME or
so I
um
have two autoimmunes, very open about it. I have palindromic rheumatism, which is a very rare part, very rare, kind of similar to a rheumatoid arthritis. So I don't have the arthritis damage to the bones, but it means I have the pain, swelling of joints. It's very rare in a sense of people may think that you don't have any problem because it can move from joint to joint around the body, mainly the upper part of the body. Some people get in their feet, and it can last from a few hours to a few months to years, depending on the person. And sometimes the triggers are really, really difficult to identify. So you could run a marathon one day and then can't walk. And not because you run the marathon, you literally can't walk because you're in a flare up. So I have that one. And then I have undefined connective tissue disorder, which is to do with the connective tissue that you have in your muscles. So now my joints are inflamed. And then unfortunately now my muscles are inflamed as well. Again, a lot of that's upper body. And that means that I can get a lot of muscle fatigue, physical fatigue. So I get a challenge of having the mental fatigue with my neurodiverse challenges, and then the physical fatigue that I can get with my autoimmune. And that can be quite challenging, and that can have a downstream impact in some things that you get, like, the flu will take me longer, a cold will take me longer to respond because my body's got
yeah.
to deal with.
Do you think as you get a bit older, I mean, I have no idea how old you are, but as I've got older, I sometimes wonder, we just did this episode on the menopause, which is fascinating, the effect of hormones and but also the effect of age. I think sometimes your youthful vigor can give you extra masking ability. And
I was
then
going to say
as
that.
you get older, sometimes you've not got the physical or even the emotional energy to start masking it with different techniques, and you have to just say, oh my goodness, this is the way I am, this is the way I work. Because I'm listening to you, right? And I've got like inflammation issues, I've got problems with my eczema, my skin, dry eye, weird kind of inflammations happening and so on. And I'm on a diet to try and deal with all of that, and it's helping a lot. But you realize that these things are all quite very connected,
Mhm.
and I see this within childhood as well. A lot of children with dyslexia go off with tummy issues, or they don't want to go into school because they're not feeling well, and so on. And sometimes it's hard to tell whether this is psychosomatic, whether they're making it up to try and protect themselves, whether the body's maybe even making it up,
This is
or
true.
not even making it up, but actually creating something to protect themselves, etc. And it's better to have this kind of pain than that sort of emotional humiliation or whatever it is, the shame or the feeling of inadequacy, etc. That there's a whole range of things happening. And I think that the tendency is that this pressure squeezes every aspect of yourself as a human being. And wherever there's those thinner, weaker points, it starts to bulge there and maybe even burst. And I'm feeling it myself, and I've seen it in your story here.
Yeah, I think the body mind connection is something that we know so little about. And I think that is so true. If I think about some of my friends who have diagnosed with dyslexia, they have also got health challenges. And I know
Yeah.
that people who say, well, you can have
Yes.
health challenges and not have
Yes.
dyslexia. But I do believe there is some kind of manifestation from the trauma around the challenges you have with challenges like dyslexia, that do the stressors. I have the gene, that autoimmune gene. Members of my family do. My mum does. My mum is the most healthiest, at most
Yes.
active
Yes.
elder,
Yes.
older person. Looks way younger than she is, does stuff way younger than she. Friends are younger than her. How does she not have that? And I do have that.
Yeah.
There's a stressor element to it. And I've always been a sensitive child, so the stressor
Yes.
around that
Yeah.
sensitivity. But I think you made a great point around age. And that was also a really important reason why I decided to leave the environment I worked for. I got to the point where I was thinking maybe I was perimenopause, not in terms of systematically in regards to my cycle, but in terms of some of the symptoms that come up in regards to cognitive function, some of the just abilities to be able to mask and just do things. I just found that I was looking back and thinking, well, I was able to do that, and I had this stress. And now I can't even consider being able to tackle this task. And though I was able to do well within my role, my question's always been about how sustainable is this? And that's when I also was looking at ADHD and looking at that. And we know we're starting to gather, and I'm hoping the more that we scream and shout about hormone changes, and the impact it have on our cognitive ability, we can understand that, not just for women, but for men too, because men do go through a cycle as well, hormone changes. But we really understand the impact that actually has. That will help us to say, this is why there was a lot of older women who are now finding that they can't mask and realizing that they were masking. Sometimes
Yeah.
people don't understand this, but sometimes you don't even know you're masking until
Yeah.
it stops. And then you're
Yeah. Yeah.
like, oh, I was able to cope and now I can't. And then you realize, if you're in that community where you're knowledgeable around masking, then you realize, oh my God, I was masking this. And that's what happened to me. And that took me on that kind of internal reflection, which I'm an advocate for. You don't need to have someone with you on that journey. My utopia would be that my job doesn't exist. You don't need a coach. Everybody's doing the work. Everybody's got the space to do the work. And taking time to reflect yourself and really looking at, this was okay for me and now it's not. What's changed? What's happened there? And then thinking, was that always easy for me, or was I actually using a lot of energy to make it easy for me?
I know we're getting close to the end of our time, and I just wanted to make sure I asked you about your coaching side of things, where Do you do workplace strategy coaching as part of the Access to Work scheme?
So yes, so I do. So I have multiple different coaching. I'm associate coach with a few organizations. I have my own private clients that I coach. I've got different packages for those. And I also work in organizations in regards to coaching with them. And I do coaching for employees, but also coaching for employees and managers. They can get access of support for access to work. If you're a small business or self-employed, again, if you get support from Access to Work, I also do coaching. And some of my clients actually are business owners like myself who need support, who need that space. So that's the kind of coaching that I provide. But going back to it, the most important thing I would say to the community is that take time to reflect on what you need. Coaching is fantastic in making you have that space and accountability, but you need to do the work. So you need to be able to make that time to say, I need to change, something needs to change, and commit to that. And if you're able to do some pre-reflection on what I want to get out of it, and then you decide to get support through coaching, then it can be the most powerful life-changing tool. If you don't have that mindset to change, if you really are not embracing understanding yourself, then it's a journey that's great, but it's not powerful than you actually spending time. I see that across my clients, the ones that really spend time trying the strategies out, be honest that it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think of this like, I hope the person who's listening to this just now, that you are thinking that it's worthwhile to stop while you're walking up the mountain and take your shoes off and just have a look at your feet and see if you've got some blisters, you know? And maybe you've got a friend with you or a professional with you, and they can look at those blisters, or maybe no blisters. Look at your feet and say, you know, am I getting blisters? And you look at it and you go, yeah, I think I might have a blister developing there, or there's a scar, or there's a weak point that from previous that keeps happening in that particular spot, and you don't understand why. Because there are different pairs of shoes out there, you know, different tools, different processes, different techniques that are ridiculously simple sometimes, where you just go, oh, you've got a size 10 shoes. I'm a size 10. They measure it. You're a size 10. You've got size 8 shoes on. What on earth are you doing with size 8? Oh, well, I was given them when I was young and I was told everyone has these shoes. This is just a standard size. You're like, no, you're a size 10. You need size 10 shoes. Here's some size 10 shoes, and you put it on. Oh, that's nice. Maybe you need some temporary plasters to cover over those blisters for a while until they heal up, and then you can walk more comfortable with your size 10. Same analogy might go with other equipment that you've got. You might have a rucksack on your back that doesn't fit you. You might have a trousers that don't fit you. You might have a knife, a pair of scissors. Like, you know, left-handed people can't use normal scissors because scissors are designed to have a pressure from one angle to another to create that overlapping cut. When you put it into your other hand, it opens up the scissors, and so they don't cut. So you need left-handed scissors for left-handed people. And it seems ridiculous, but it's like, that's just the way they're designed. And once you get left-handed scissors, you're like, oh my goodness, I can cut things out of paper. It's not my problem.
Left-handed scissors now. I've never considered, I'm left-handed. I've never considered the
really
the mechanism of it. I've just again, you adapt, right? We talk about masking. You just adapt. You just assume that you have to cut twice if you're left-handed.
No, you don't.
When you're right-handed.
Yeah.
But I love the analogy around, you know, the rat sack and the scissors. And I was even thinking the walking stick, because I think what happens to a lot of people is they're at the base camp and they're all given a rat sack. Here's your shoes. Here's your rat sack. Here's these things, the stick. And they're walking with them in their hands and they don't even know what to do with them. And like you said, taking your shoes off, having a look at the blisters, getting support around, oh, but if you use the walking stick on the pressure on that leg, you'll get less blisters. Having the tools are great, but having someone and having time to reflect and knowing that you've got blisters and advice about which one, that's the life-changing piece.
Absolutely. And do you know what I found is it's the highest return on investment activity you can do in personal development, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, oh, I want to climb mountains higher and faster. Okay, I could exercise my muscles. I could learn this technique for climbing over rocks. Or you could change your shoes.
Yeah, or you could just look at your feet,
Yeah,
look at
you
what
can
you
look at
have,
your
and
feet.
make sure
Yeah,
you know this is my feet. This is the measure
yeah,
of my feet, and I know
yes,
what detail I need to have for the shoes. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah. And so I think sometimes when we're thinking about personal development, personal and professional development, we can often, with dyslexia or ADHD or neurodiversity, we can maybe be thinking, oh, I've got to learn this new organization system or this new technique or maybe this AI or whatever it is, that is big and shiny. But then sometimes I find with clients when I'm doing workplace strategy coaching with them, I don't do coaching per se. I think it's an important distinction. I think there's this distinction between workplace strategy coaching and workplace coaching and then counseling. And
Mhm.
that if you think about them as, I think workplace strategy coaching is more like you go into the mountain warehouse shop and you go in and you go, do you know what? I'm having a nightmare with these shoes. And they're like, oh, right, let's measure your feet. Let's try these shoes on, go
Yep,
walk on that and come back.
yep,
And oh, is it okay? Can I walk on it for a day? Yeah, sure. Here's a pair just to try them out.
yep,
Go
yep.
away, come back next week, see, oh yeah, these are the ones for me. Or they didn't quite work. I don't know why. Oh, it's all right. Maybe it's the angle or whatever. And it's much more strategy coaching is much more technically based sometimes, around tools, speech to text, text to speech, mind mapping software, that sort of realm. But then there's the coaching realm, which is like there's an overlap where you've got like, let's look at your process now. How do you walk? What's your process of walking up this kind of rock or whatever? And you're like, well, I do this, this, and that. And you go, oh, I notice you keep stumbling when you do this particular step in the process. And you're like, yeah, I do. It's just the way it is. And you're like, well, actually, that's a particular trait of dyslexia. And if you do this sort of smaller steps, you might not stumble in this particular way. And you're like,
Mhm.
really? And you do that and you go, oh gosh, I don't need to have grazed knees every single time I climb up rocks. I can actually do it without hurting myself.
Yeah, and then I think, like you said, moving on to we talk about counseling therapy is very, very different. That's like very much dealing with the trauma, going back in time, really looking at where those fundamentals have come from. And then the workplace coaching is kind of like the step before you get to the warehouse on the mountain. It's like when the person's like, ouch, and you're like, okay,
Yes.
let's have a look at what's going on. I've got, I just, every time I just have a little bit of a pain in my calf, or yeah, that big
Yeah.
toe is just
Yeah.
pinging me a little
Yeah.
bit. And then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, let's help take you off the shoes. And then you'd go for the coaching bit of taking off the shoes. Oh, you've got a blister there, that's showing up
Yes.
for you. And then it's like you said, the merger between the workplace strategy coaching and the coaching of, oh, let's see you now walk with your current shoes on. I know it might be a bit difficult. Oh, I can see you stumbling over that block, that rock.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the strategy piece, which is, okay, let's go to the warehouse and look at what we can do. So I think all of those pieces come together. And actually, for me, as a neurodiverse coach, I look across the whole board because I love the idea. And I always say to clients, don't book next week if you don't have the capacity to try it out. We need, particularly if you're neurodiverse, we need time. We need time to understand what it is that we just went through in that whole
Yes.
coaching session.
Yes. Yes.
Time to try it out, look at what works and bring it back to either yourself or me in regards to, okay, how'd that work for you? So we
Yeah,
can take.
it's interesting because I do the one-to-one workplace strategy coaching with clients. And what we tend to do is like 12 sessions.
Mm,
Okay. 12 one-to-one sessions, 1 hour at a time. We look at different software like Apple Notes, mind mapping software, speech to text software, your calendar, reminders, just basic kind of things like this that can give you such a big return on investment just to get those simple Lego building blocks in place, which are often processes.
mm,
And because dyslexia is a processing difference, you need to use these tools slightly differently.
mm,
Now, the interesting thing about that is a lot of those clients then join a group coaching session that I do, okay, for people, and I thought that would be lower value for them, okay, than the one-to-one coaching. And the reason I'm mentioning this is they come to the group coaching session and there's maybe 5, 10, 15 people there that I've coached one-to-one, and we all get together and just chat about what are you using, what have you discovered, how are you using this, etc. And they actually find they consolidate their learning more sometimes through the group coaching than they do in the one-to-one, because they can just lean back, observe, and just process without being on the spotlight in the one-to-one. So it was interesting. You made me think about that. And sometimes I think you need to process information one-to-one. Sometimes you need to process it one-to alone or one on your own, and sometimes you kind of need to be part of a group who's talking about it, but you're not necessarily having to always contribute. You can just kind of absorb it. What do you think?
I think that's an amazing idea. And I think a lot of neurodiverse individuals would like a space to be there, present without the spotlight being on anybody. So then you've got the different personality types that come out of that are just solely theirs. You might have the person who is taking time to reflect. You might have the person who talks to, like me, sometimes I talk to think, depending on, and it allows that safe space, but you're all on that journey together. A lot of the times, especially dyslexic individuals, we like to learn. So practically doing something physically helps us retain that, because the muscle memory of doing it actually is better than us actually reading it, or even sometimes hearing those. And so even being in a room or being online in a space and hearing someone talk, but then we might be fiddling with something, or we might have something in our hands or making notes, that helps us retain that and get a variety of different perspectives. When you talk about, like, one of the packages I looked at, I was looking at, a lot of people do these intense sessions of coaching that are way more than an hour. And, some organizations where some associate roles I've worked with, they've really pushed like 2-hour sessions. And I'm like, for neurodiverse individuals, that's really overwhelming.
Yes.
And so splitting things up and having that space, I think, is important as well. So like you said, the one-to-one where I'm like, I need that kind of support. I need that person to kind of help me on that journey. Then that time to reflect. And then I think the group session is very good in embedding, learning different ways. Oh yeah, I talked to Darius about this strategy for me, but I really like what you just said there. I think I'm going to actually add that onto my initial work and build up that foundation. I think is important. And I think the most final,
do you do anything like that? Do you do anything like that?
I don't do group at the moment. It's something I'm looking at creating. Most of mine are one-to-one sessions, other than when we're doing it with the managers and for the corporate ones. But I think the most important thing I want to say is people come, and you probably get clients come where they're saying, by the end of the session, I want this all to go away. And what they have to understand is this is a part of you and it's a journey.
Do you have any clients who are like that? Do you have clients that come with that approach?
To a session and say, I'm broken. The first thing they said to me is, I'm broken. Can you fix my ADHD? And I was like, okay, we need to really look at what that is, why you feel like you're broken. We worked a lot on, they had other things go up. They had coaching before, they had therapy before, they were dealing with other traumas and stuff. And they were very open about that. But we really worked on that perception, that internal dialogue. A lot of the work I do with my clients is around their internal dialogue, around what they feel they should do.
It's all about shoulds, isn't it? All the should. Yeah. Talk about non-violent communication. You know NVC?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love him. He's quite a guy. The word should is such a powerful internal
it's
word.
Great. I had one client recently who basically the first thing they said to me was, I don't do emails, I don't do anything like that. Don't send me any invites this way. Don't want to know. It was really, really quite, they signed up for this process. They had turned up, but the barriers were up. And, if you go by your standards, coaching model, you would just kind of like, move on or whatever. And I was like, right, no, we need to figure out how we're going to communicate. And so we spent the half of that introduction session before I could even do the safeguarding and all the kind of stuff. I was like, we need to work on this, because if we can't connect and we can't communicate, why are you going to be here? What's going to make you show up? I will show up, but what's going to make you show up? What's going to make you do the work? And so we came up with alternative ways of communicating, and I would do a little bit extra.
Like what?
So we did WhatsApp.
What's that?
So we had WhatsApp. The way I have mine structured is that my clients get a portal, so they can access everything, all the notes, all the meeting invites, everything for their personal portal. They don't even need to have a password, just their email address. They've got access to their portal. I put that on the WhatsApp. I pinned it at the top. If you forget anything, always go to the portal. I sent him the notes of the actions, and I get all the Zoom calls were sent to him all by WhatsApp. You're going to get it in your inbox. You're not going to find it. I'm going to send it to you by WhatsApp. And that's how we did it. I gave reminders, and I put reminders in myself to help support him, because it was the accountability piece. He was setting up a business, and he was all over the place. He's trying to do work, access to work, and etc. And we've come to our last session, and he's like, I don't know if I've achieved anything. And I was like, okay, let's go back to that first session where you didn't use emails, and now you're realizing that actually I'm not going to force myself to try and use something I clearly am having difficulties with because of my ADHD. I am going to get support that's going to help me with this, because I know it's a task that I'm just not going to do. And I'm trying to convince myself to fit in this box that I actually cannot work in. And we worked a lot around him being okay and understanding some of the things he does. Like, he's motivated to help others, but not necessarily do his own things. He realized that he needs more support, and this is a pinnacle part of him starting his business. We looked at him now having more of finding a role that could bring him some more confidence around his business, before he went into it fully and transitioned. These were all, to him, seemed insignificant, but he'd done so much deep reflection, deep work. So he didn't come up with specific tools that he would use. There were strategies, but he had a space to really reflect, and that accountability of turning up and having to have that conversation, and having to not just sit there and be like, nothing's coming up, doing the work in the session.
Yeah. Well, Danielle, this has been fantastic conversation. There's so much more to talk about, but I think we need to stop now. And if you've been listening to this and you've been thinking, I need to connect with Danielle, I'll put the links in the description. Swipe up, you'll find her links. She'll give me links to your bio and so on. Why don't you just say how people can contact you?
So you can come to Danielle Cudjoe Michalski on LinkedIn, or you can go to Thinking Like Coach, mainly on Instagram and LinkedIn, and you can find me on Facebook. Instagram is my love language. So you'll get loads of funny personality memes, behind the scenes, and some insights.
Great. We'll put all those links in the description below. And yeah, I highly recommend, guys, that you do take some time, find someone, whether it's counseling or coaching or workplace strategy coaching, do it, because with someone who's a friend or paid, but it's the highest return on investment in terms of personal and professional development you can do, because actually a lot of this, because it's kind of mechanistic sometimes, it's like, oh, here's a particular blocker that's predictable, and here's a solution that can help it, like shoe size, etc. So take stock. And Danielle, thank you very much for being so open about your journey as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been great. Thank you. Next time. Oh, before we go, final words. Any final words?
I think if you're an adult, dyslexic adult, I think it's really important that you just take time to reflect. It doesn't have to be long. We're not talking about going on a retreat. It doesn't have to take hours. It can just be committing to 10, 15 minutes, just trying to understand what is showing up for me. What are the things that I find challenging and really draining me? What things that I find that really energize me, that I really love? I recently released a mini energy guide, a mini energy kit, which just talks about what the things that shown up for me and how they impact me. Go and check it out. It's completely free. You can download it and just take that time. And that may then help you understand which part that you need in terms of the therapy, the coaching, and the workplace strategy coaching that Darius is talking about. And obviously reach out to either one of us or someone else around understanding which is more suitable for your needs.
Fantastic. Leave it there. Danielle, till next time.
Bye-bye.
This podcast is sponsored by dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com. It's my day job when I'm not hosting this podcast. Tell me, do you know what you want to achieve in the workplace, but you're struggling with how to achieve it? Maybe you suspect some traits of dyslexia are getting in the way. Well, that's where Dyslexia Productivity Coaching comes in, because we give you a simple productivity system for your Apple devices that harnesses the creativity that comes with your dyslexia. It includes proven methods like note-taking, reminders, speech-to-text, mind mapping, and more, all tailored to your needs. It'll free up your time and help you achieve outstanding results. Book a complimentary call to discuss it with me, and if you do it soon, I may also be available to coach you personally via Zoom. So don't be shy, go to dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com or swipe up and book it now.